All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Mainly Hoops podcast, where we're finishing up actually with the Big 12 transfer news. We've got our last team, Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State made some good moves this offseason. We're going to dive right into it. Start off with Cody. Cody, who do we think their top transfer was in the portal?
I'll say it was Kanye Clary. I know he didn't have a great year last year at Mississippi State. He only played 7 games and missed the rest of the year with a leg injury, and was at Penn State before that for a couple of years, and before he was actually dismissed from the team for some matter. I'm not really completely sure what it was, but I do think he's the most talented guard on this team. I think he's a high level pick and roll operator. He's tough to handle in multiple coverages because he has a solid dribble jumper game, along with he's super creative in pick and roll overall, and he has plus burst with just high level ball handling, is able to fit in tight windows. So I do like his ability in the half court, and he fits pretty well in this transition based Steve Lutz offense, which I think a lot of these guys do. But I think Kanye Clary is the most well suited to kind of thrive in this offense. Like I said, he didn't have a great year last year because I think he's more of a primary operator. I don't think he fit well alongside guys like Josh Hubbard and Cam Matthews, who ran a little bit of like point forward. So I do think it kind of has to be his offense, and I think he has some quality shooting pieces around him. I don't think it's great, but I do think he's going to have some space to operate. And even when he doesn't, I think he's crafty enough in a half court setting to fit in the tight windows, and he plays with a little more physicality than you might think for a 5'11" guard. So yeah, Clary would be the guy I choose.
Marcus, who are you rolling with for the top?
Yeah, I mean, I would say Clary too. I think, the last time we saw him really play, at Penn State, he played about 30 minutes a game, 17 points, good shooting splits, shot at over 37% from three. He has a lot of confidence in his game. I remember watching him at Penn State. And, he's not afraid to take big shots, and he'll make them too. So I think this is a good ad for Oklahoma State. They also brought in Anthony Roy, who led the country in scoring last year, right? 25.7. Shot the ball really well. Obviously, it's going to be a different story for him here at Oklahoma State than it was at Green Bay, but nonetheless, I mean, 50% from the field, 43% from three, still very impressive. If they can get a fraction of that, that'd be great. They also brought in Victorious Miller, 4-star that was at LSU, had kind of a rocky year last year, but going into a sophomore year now, he's going to have a little bit more opportunity, another year of experience under his belt. So I'd expect him to have a little bit better of a season here. Then they added, some decent depth pieces, like Isaiah Coleman, good player, had a solid season at Seton Hall, almost 16 a game, 5 rebounds, and Christian Coleman from UAB, who had a decent year, 12-7. So overall, Oklahoma State, I think, had a better offseason than they've had in quite some time. They should be more competitive, I would think, this year in the Big 12.
Marcus, you mentioned some other transfers they received. Cody, how do you think these guys fit into the Oklahoma State system?
I think they all fit pretty well because I do think they all like to play in a more transition style offense. I think they all kind of thrive in the open floor. I do think Anthony Roy is he's an interesting prospect. I mean, he's a really talented shot creator. He had the highest isolation usage in the entire country, and he was in the 99th percentile in efficiency. So you can give him the ball and tell him to get a bucket, and he'll go out there and do it. It's not, obviously, isolation isn't the most efficient form of offense, but he was able to score at a super high clip, albeit it was against some fairly poor competition, but he showed true 3-level scoring ability. So I do think that's going to be able to translate some of the off the ball stuff, and his overall shot release is a little bit iffy, plus the shot selection. So I don't think he's going to be a 25 point per game scorer or even a 20 point per game scorer, because I do think his role is going to be sort of limited because he's fairly limited as a, secondary scorer. Like off the catch, he's fine. He's not elite. And I don't really think he defends all that well. So I do think there are some limitations in his game. But, I think everyone fits the system fairly well. Like Coleman, I think he thrives in the open floor as well. He's kind of limited as a shot maker, but I think, it's secondary playmaking is there for him. And I think he brings some two-way ability. I don't think he's an elite defender. The way I viewed him before I dove into the film on him, I thought he was a much better defender than he actually was. He struggled a bit last year. He didn't really make the year two leap on that end that I expected. So, but overall, I think they did a pretty good job. I think Victorious Miller is a pretty good depth add. I think he has true 3-level scoring ability. Shot selection's a bit iffy, which is, I think, kind of a theme across the board for this roster. But the fact that they're going to be playing in the open floor a lot, if they're able to get out and transition as often as they want to, I think they're going to have success.
Mm-hmm. Is that the biggest concern for this roster? Just the shot selection, the inefficiency that they could get into on offense?
I would say so. I think they're going to struggle a lot more in a half-court setting just because they don't really have the high-level shooting outside of Anthony Roy, who shot 43%.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of other guys on this roster that have struggled. Clary is a more interior-oriented guard. He didn't take a high volume of threes, albeit he did shoot 37% 2 years ago. Coleman was just a 30% shooter, albeit it was extremely high usage for him as well. But he doesn't really profile as the greatest off-ball shooter. And a guy like other guys, I do think Miller's better than the 32% shooter. If he gets more open three-point opportunities, I think he can have success. He has a consistent release, and like I said, I do think there's some 3-level scoring ability in there. And then a guy like Jalen Curry that they brought in from UMass, I don't love him. He's probably going to be the backup point guard on this roster. He shot at 35% from 3 last year, but really limited as an interior scorer. So he's going to have to be solid off the catch for this team. But as a whole, yeah, I do think they struggle more in a half-court setting. But like I said, I think Clary is going to help a lot there because of his pick and roll operation.
Marcus, what's your biggest concern with this roster? Still early, of course, but
yeah, I mean, I think with Roy coming from Green Bay, can he give them a fraction of what he gave them there on still solid efficiency? Can Clary get back to what he was at Penn State or something similar to that? If not, it could be another rocky season. Can Victorious Miller, take a second-year leap? It all kind of remains to be seen. I think there's some unknowns with this team, with Miller having that rocky year last year at LSU, Clary only playing 7 games last year. So, not a ton of volume for him last year. And then Roy coming, obviously up a big jump in level. So that's a concern for me. I think the backcourt being just not a ton of experience at this level.
All right. What do we expect for the upcoming year? We'll kind of get the final thoughts as well right here. Cody, we'll start with you.
I honestly think it's pretty similar to how they finished last year. I don't remember their exact record. I don't know if any of you guys have that on you, but it wasn't. I think they went 17 and 18 overall. I do think it's kind of somewhere in that area, because I'm also kind of worried about some things on the defensive end. They don't really have a true defensive anchor. Depending on what Lefteris Montzoukis is, he's a Greek international transfer. He's 22 years old. I haven't dove into him at all. I think he projects to be in the rotation as a front court guy, but I'm not completely sure what he brings to the table as a rim protector or even on the offensive end right now. But in a guy like Christian Coleman he's more of a 4 than he is a true defensive anchor at the 5. And then I also don't really love Parsifala as a prospect really at all for coming from Oregon State. I think he's really efficient in post up on the offensive end, but he's basically a 0 on the defensive end, especially with his rim protection skills just basically being non-existent. So I do have issues on both sides of the floor, but I am fairly high on Kanye Clary, and I think he's kind of the best guard that Steve Lutz has had so far in his 2-year career at Oklahoma State. So I would say they finished fairly similar to where they were this past year.
Marcus, what are your expectations? Final thoughts?
I think they can be a little bit better, maybe. Just going to depend on the guards, how they translate, how, Clary comes back after not really playing last year. I think they have a chance to be maybe a spot or two better. But overall, like, this isn't a tournament team. Like Cody said, defense isn't good enough and too much uncertainty. So I think the Cowboys are, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. A couple spots higher in the Big 12, but still just not quite good enough.
All right, that wraps up the Big 12. As always, thanks everyone for listening to the Mainly Hoops podcast.